Shineth. Is there a serious possibility of Manchester United being in a relegation battle next season? A manager who wants to leave, a dreadful squad in horrendous form, and an owner who won't or can't spend money. Is it a genuine possibility?
I think no. Not because of any great optimism around Manchester United, but I think if you look at the three teams coming up, which I think the sort of Manchester United Tottenham buffer that they've had this season, I think
the demilitarised zone of the relegation.
Yes, I think will still probably exist next season. Then I think you add in a couple of teams in Nottingham Forest and Crystal Palace who aren't at all used to dealing with European football, which I think might have a bigger effect on them than people think. I think there will be enough for Manchester United to be mid-table. But to say there is enough there for Manchester United to be mid-table, and bearing in mind there might be drop-offs from other teams as well who've arguably overachieved this season. So maybe a Bournemouth, Brentford, a Brighton, for example. It's not even damning with faint praise, is it, to say that Manchester United should be comfortably mid-table? That would still be another season of failure. But in short, no, I don't think there'll be a relegation battle.
You're looking at me now, Marcus. I think it's a possibility. I don't know if I think it's a serious possibility. And they're quite different things in my mind, at least. But I think you look at how these things tend to manifest themselves, and they tend to manifest themselves because a series of poor decisions are made, and then people try and chase their tail and end up making more and more poor decisions. And if the financial picture that Ratcliffe is talking about, and actually Andy touched a bit on it yesterday about how the fact they've really got no money beyond this Cunha signing, if that turns out to be the case and they're actually hamstrung on how they can strengthen and how they can change things, it then just comes down to how bad you think they can get and whether that's bad enough to be relegated.
I love Cunha, but is he the wisest signing for a club that don't have that much money?
Jim was saying earlier in the week that he thinks he's nicely fits what United need and all the rest of it. I think there's a chance, as I think I said, there's a chance that he is someone who exacerbates problems rather than fixes them.
Okay.
Given his track record and given what we've seen from him. But that's a kind of slightly separate point. The point I wanted to make is if you Shineth on YouTube is asking us to consider this, and then I think what you have a responsibility to do then is go, right, okay, what would the circumstances need to be for this to be a serious possibility? Well, the circumstances would need to be that one of the promoted teams next season actually does quite a bit better than we anticipate. If that's the case, then you get into a situation where, obviously this season it was Spurs, they only pick up 38 points, they have a 13-point buffer to the relegation zone. If one of those promoted teams actually does quite a bit better, United are only on 42, I mean, it kind of depends on how else other teams do as well, because ultimately the only three teams can go down. It comes down to a position where it's not actually then in that situation not just about Man United, it's about how good the other teams are as well. Because I think
and that's a huge part of the conversation
definitely,
anyway, isn't it?
Because Man United need to be bad. They are bad. Can they be 5 points worse next season than they could this season? Yes, I think they probably could. But even if they were that next season, to extrapolate across to this season, that still gives them quite a big buffer.
Can Burnley and Sunderland and Leeds get 42 points next season?
I think
between them.
Well, yeah. I mean, sadly, that's.
I think. Look, we're going to come on to relegation more broadly in a later question someone's asked us, and that'll be a helpful framing. But I think one of them can.
Yeah, but Manchester United, though, prioritised the Europa League. So when we say they got 42 points this season, yes, of course, they factually did. But actually, you take away next season any kind of other cup competition which they may well focus on.
It's the reverse of the Palace Forest point, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, because the context is crucial. They knew they were going to stay up this season. I mean, Spurs, Ange Postecoglou, we're going to come on to as well. He said we prioritise this competition at the complete behest of the Premier League, like to a disrespectful level to the paying fans and the Premier League. But they won the trophy. They did it. So I understand you talk about the points totals, but Manchester United were focusing on the Europa League really, and they knew they weren't going to go down. So
at the very back end, I don't think there's a massive point.
Spurs certainly were.
They were.
Yeah. So I think the context there is.
But do you honestly think that if say they went out the Europa League early, United,
yeah.
do you honestly think they were capable enough to win maybe more games than they won?
Yeah, it may well have been only one or two or a few more, but yeah, I think they would have picked up more points without a doubt.
Okay.
I think Cunha's a decent signing because I think he's a good player. But the reason why I think he's a decent signing, and I kind of said it a bit sort of tongue in cheek before, but sadly, where they are, he's quite a rugged sort of player that if he gets the ball 25 yards from goal and he can ping one in, like that's maybe what they need. Someone who is slightly less system-based and is a bit more grab it by the scruff of the neck. Because I think
exactly it. He's someone to put an average team on his back.
Yes, and I think he might relish that, actually.
He loves it. That's exactly what he's all about.
Exactly, yeah. And you do that with a bigger crowd, with a bigger club and all the rest of it. I think he may well do the job there. And scoring goals at the bottom end of the table is always it was difficult anywhere, but in the bottom of the table you often look at a team's lack of goals, and if Cunha's in the side for Manchester United, then they'll get some goals. They just will. So I think for them to get relegated, I think it's going to be an enormous effort from a number of different angles, if you see what I mean, as I mix my metaphors.
I agree. Because
they're not in control of everything that happens.
Yes.
And so you look at how other teams need to be so poor.
Yeah.
And then also you've got to remember, you have to understand why, if you have to kind of fully appreciate whether you think 42 points is the absolute basement bottom level United will get. Because the reason I'm saying that is because it's been catastrophically bad in terms of, if you think that they came 8th last season with 60 points and everyone was losing their mind about how poor they were. They've gone 18 points worse this season. Yeah. Can they go another 10 points worse?
Well,
possibly not.
There's no obvious route to them getting better quickly.
Well, unless you take but you take Bruno Fernandes out of the team as well. That makes a big difference. He's their top scorer.
Well, indeed.
Yeah, and the man who makes it all happen.
Yeah. I'm interested. But if Amorim was to say, if it was going that bad, he would leave. As I say, I've often, tongue in cheek, but now it's more serious. He'll be the first to walk post-Ferguson era at Manchester
United. Well, he might get sacked. I mean, they get to October and he's been shit again. They might get sacked.
Might do, or I think he'll walk. He could well leave. So if he leaves, it'll be because it's so bad and he can't turn things around. Whereas actually, if you get a kind of more pragmatic manager, whether it's just to the end of the bloody Sean Dyche, do you know what I mean? Like somebody...
They ain't going to hire Sean Dyche.
I know they're not going to hire Sean Dyche. It was, again, that was tongue in cheek. But somebody like a guy who's just in for an interim, with some of the players that they have, just playing it basic, just playing a basic formation, a basic strategy, I think they would have enough, dare I use the word quality, to get out of there. Because they have Cunha, they have, say, if you can say fit,
I think whichever way you turn, Marcus, I think it's quite difficult to make the argument that they go. Because there's so many different variables.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Let's go back to Shay's question, which is not will they get relegated? Could they be? Is there a possibility of them being in a relegation battle? Which again, I think is slightly different.
So I would see it like Wolves this season. If they're down there, we were all looking at Wolves thinking they've got more quality than the other three who are down there.
They'll get their Vitor Pereira to sort it out.
And they did. And relegation hasn't been a word used at Molineux for weeks and maybe even months now. And I think if it got really bad with Manchester United, that's how I would see it play out.
Yeah, and you know what?
But I think it's a relevant question, though, sadly.
It is, I agree. And I think the next question kind of piggybacks off this in a way. It's from Aaron on Discord. With next year's Premier League teams confirmed, I think the majority of fans expect, barring a disaster from one of the established clubs, see above, Aaron hasn't put that, I've put that, the three promoted to go back down for the third consecutive season. If this does happen, does the Premier League need to address this to stop the league becoming 17 teams getting stronger and stronger, plus 3 from the Championship almost joining as wildcards, and importantly how? Now, look, loads of people have been talking about this on the Discord, and most of them have been speaking about reducing the Premier League to 18 teams. Of course, something that Ligue 1 have done relatively recently, albeit in a very different financial context.
Was it last season, was it, the first 18-team league?
The season before the one just finished.
Right, okay. Yeah.
There's one here from Aaron, maybe a different Aaron. 18 teams would be my suggestion and would definitely help with fixture congestion, but is that the only option? Our Ball says, sadly, the only solution I can see the Premier League taking is to have no relegation. Then after maybe reducing the league to 18 teams. Eggs and Bacon for a bit of balance says, personally, I'm not 100% convinced it's a trend. Yes, 2 seasons in a row is a small sample size. I can see another Brighton, Brentford, Bournemouth happening again with some clever budgeting and coaching.
Yeah, it's a really good discussion, and there's a lot of different viewpoints as you've articulated there, Andy, on Discord. It's a great place for that. Like, I find this a really fascinating question. The angle I'd like to come at it from is that our Ball says, sadly, the only solution I can see is the Premier League is to have no relegation, right? 14 teams in the Premier League need to vote for something for it to happen, right? I'm right in saying that, aren't I? That's still the case. That's the process.
How many US owners?
Yeah, well...
That was going to be my point.
Yeah,
okay.
Totally.
The point is, you've now got, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, count them now, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12... American owners in the Premier League. Now, a couple of them perhaps don't have the big say in football matters. Like, I think I'm right in saying that Aston Villa is also co-owned with an Egyptian billionaire. Obviously, Ratcliffe is now doing football operations for United, not the Glazers. But generally speaking, it's been moving in that direction.
Yes.
And there are American club owners who are on the record as saying, we don't want extra jeopardy in what we do. The investments we're making for these reasons, why would we want to entertain the idea of losing Premier League status? It's not beyond the realms of possible. I think it feels fairly fanciful at this stage. Yeah. But if you're talking about direction of travel, I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility that the Premier League owners could vote for something quite drastic. I don't know how that would work in terms of competition law and how the EU or the UEFA or whoever would see it. But that's a concern. I think the 18 teams thing is interesting because it, to an extent, helps with fixture congestion. But I think it also makes it even more of a closed shop, right? It makes it very, very difficult to see how we proceed because obviously we used to be 24 teams, right? And now it was 22 teams, and now we're 20.
Unless you're one of the biggest teams, I don't think you're voting for that. Because firstly, you're cutting off a couple of games of revenue, which I think is a big deal. And the other thing is, if you're not one of that cohort at the very top, you're putting yourselves in big danger. So why would you be a turkey voting for Christmas?
Well, was David Dean? He was one of the guys. Who was on the ground when the Premier League started, and he said that when they went from 22 teams to 20 teams, he felt like it was a great chance to go to 18. And he said, I think it was last year, it should be 18 teams. But again, Daniel Levy was also kind of he was more saying we should maybe get rid of the League Cup, he was saying that fairly recently. So there's always these chats at the top of the game saying this. You've got 2 extra Champions League games now as well. You've got the Club World Cup, but that should happen once every 4 years. But it's still in the calendar. You would imagine it will probably stay no matter what happens. I just look at the English football pyramid because it's all very well saying all the top teams, and I understand the fixture congestions totally. And you know me, I always look at the Marcus Speller big picture, aka England at international tournaments, and they're always exhausted, right? So fewer games for some England players I would be quite pleased with. But where do those 2 clubs go? Does the Championship with 24 clubs, do they take them on? Or the League One with 24 clubs? Or League Two with 24 clubs? Or the National League with 24 clubs? No, or the National League North with 24 clubs. National League South with 24 clubs. And then below that, all the leagues have got 22 clubs. Where do those 2 clubs go? You basically just push them all the way down. Maybe they do. Do Carlisle fancy it? Who's closest to the border? Where do those 2 teams go?
Good question. I think it's
what will happen?
Point.
But what will happen, Andy? You know as well as I do. It will be 2 teams, and you know what it's like for League 2 clubs to go into the National League. It's devastating, and also for not just for the fans, for the people lose their jobs. That kind of thing at that level, and so I think it would be damning for the rest of the football pyramid.
So taking it all the way back to the question, you've got a situation now where that's a really good point, by the way, and I hadn't considered that, and I don't know the answer. Maybe some of our listeners will, and they can tell us. But going back to the original question, this to me feels like the natural result of how the Premier League have been of how the Premier League has been behaving, right? Mm-hmm. Because they want to protect their own, they want to gobble up the best talent, they want to be the money guys and be the wealthiest clubs. They want to do kind of lip service to the Football League clubs. They want to give with one hand, take away with another. Everything they give the Football League, they do a load of concession or provisos that they get back, whether
EPPP,
EPPP or whatever. Yeah. And this is a natural, feels like a natural conclusion to that. Essentially, you're looking like a closed shop. And I know that one of the contributors on Discord, Eggs and Bacon, says he's not convinced it's a trend. 2 seasons in a row, small sample size, whatever. And you've said that as well, Marcus. To be fair. I get that. But I do think it's getting harder.
It is worrying the way it's going.
And I do think, we get a lot of questions for this show, and we get questions like this, and we also get questions that say, has this been the most boring Premier League season ever? That's been a lot of questions. A lot of those questions have been asked. And a big part of that is because there's been no jeopardy around relegation at all. If we do go, and it's an if we go 2 or 3, what's more seasons of it, what is absolutely clear is something, in quotes, will need to happen. Whatever it is, we need to work it out, and the Premier League themselves need to work it out. But something does need to happen, because what they'll find, and this will be the thing that will make it happen, is that the marketability of the product will decrease. Because you're going to go, okay, only a handful of teams can win the Premier League anyway. Fine, you've got a bit of a European race that we had this season, but that's a bit obscure.
But will the market?
It's a bit confusing. Well, it will, because if you just have 3 teams up, 3 teams down, 3 teams up every single year for, say, 10 years, there's not going to be a relegation battle.
But I think above that as well.
And that's part of it.
But the marketing and stuff is you're really talking about overseas. I don't think overseas people really. Most of them.
I'm talking about.
No, but the bigger market is a domestic market.
I'm talking about the basic principle. Forget the word I said. Forget marketing.
Okay.
The basic principle of the quality of the product. The quality of the product is made up of a load of different things. The quality, players, great moments, goals, title wins, relegations, and relegation's a big part of it. Some of the biggest days we've had on this show, but in the Premier League in recent memory, have been those days when on the final day 6 different teams get relegated or whatever.
Think of Fulham under Roy.
Well, I always do, but you're right. So I think that...
So the moment it starts affecting their product, Marcus, is probably the moment they'll do something.
Yeah, well, I think you're right there.
You touched on it, Marcus, when you were talking about what it means for the rest of the EFL and going all the way down, and the fact that so many clubs are sustained because there is the interest there, because there is the love for those clubs in the community. But the EFL has basically become unsustainable because of the Premier League. Because
there is no business model that exists beyond a wealthy benefactor.
No, exactly. You look at the clubs that are giving everything unsustainably to try and get in the Premier League, and actually you get some of those clubs who end up in League One. So it goes all the way down. And League One, which obviously my team Wimbledon going into, is possibly even more divided between the haves and have-nots than the Premier League in that sense. So look, there's no easy answer to this. I think the quickest answer, forget about the system of promotion and relegation for the moment. The quickest answer, the most obvious answer, is be sustainable. Football needs an independent regulator. And obviously, for a lot of Premier League clubs, they would rather not have that. They just want to behave as they want. It's bad for the game.
Totally agree.
Yeah. Yes, a debate that will rage on, no doubt, because of the nature of it all. Okay, let's have a quick break, and then we'll go to some more questions.
All right, welcome back. Here's another question from our friend James. Hello to you, James. He sent this in on YouTube. He says, after you guys judged Tottenham's season as a C, that's the YouTube video Marcus and I made grading all the Premier League teams and how their seasons has gone.
Enjoyed it.
We gave Tottenham a C. If you were Daniel Levy, would you be giving Ange the boot or giving him 1 more year? 1 more year. 1 more year. I'm not Daniel Levy.
Sitting on the fence.
Yeah. If I was me, I'd be giving him 1 more year because I think it's interesting. But
it's interesting.
Well, it's great.
It's like when you see people having a fight after the pub. It's interesting. 100%. Doesn't really should be happening.
But ultimately damning, isn't it, to us all watching it, everyone involved in it.
No comments to make.
There are no winners.
I'll put it to you. I've got my own view, but you guys go ahead.
I can't believe this is even a question. Right. He has to leave. He has to leave.
But you say he has to leave. Do you mean they have to fire him, or does he have to walk away?
Well, I think it would obviously be preferable for everyone all round if he said, thanks, I've had a lovely time, I'm going to accept my
Wouldn't be
cheque
preferable
with
him, though,
Compare
would it? Because he wouldn't have any money.
and leave. Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Tottenham have got to move on from here. And we kind of touched on this before, didn't we? When we talked about when West Ham won the Conference League.
I touched on it a bit.
And massively underachieved in the Premier League with a lot of expensive players. And they're like, oh, yeah, but we've won a European trophy. He deserves... Come on, man. I mean, really?
You could run in the Europa League next to the following season.
A cup competition that, you're one of the favourites to win and you win it. It does not make up.
We should point out, by the way, that West Ham won the Conference League in 2023 and they finished 14th in the Premier League that season.
Yes.
And they were nowhere near as bad as Spurs have been this season.
No, that's right. That's right. And I think...
I mean, slightly poorer competition than the Europa League, but I take the point.
Yeah, and I think... But it's the same thing to an extent, because it's all about what a trophy win means. Just... riding roughshod over all reasonable logic.
And I think
that's what it is.
Before you come in, Marcus, I just point out that the word on the street among, and I'm sure Andy has been able to replicate this among like journalist colleagues and friends and stuff, is that everyone seems to be saying he is going, it's happening.
Really?
They just haven't announced it yet. He's being fired. It's going to happen. So we expect it to happen. I wonder if you've got a different viewpoint, though, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, this is not the question, but from Postecoglou's point of view. I understand why he didn't do the old, right, I want to trophy, up yours, see you later, even though it would have been brilliant. Because for him, that's almost an admission of defeat, if you see what I mean. So I get that, and obviously, which manager wouldn't want to crack at the Champions League? But the question is about would Levy give him the boot or not? I thought he might keep him just because...
Human shield?
Yeah, a little bit, because I think...
Are we back to Ten Hag?
Well, maybe.
I've been saying that all year about Postecoglou.
Well, we all thought whatever happens, he'll go in the summer.
But I think it's got too bad for that.
Well, I think so. I think it was really, really bad. As you say, with the example of West Ham there, it's not to focus on one thing and the other. It's so piss poor in the league. I think for Levy, though, if he sacks him, people will go, oh, for goodness sake, here we go again. The man's just won us a trophy and more money, and it's going to cost you more to get him and out, and all that the sort of money talk.
You think Spurs fans will say that?
I think it might do. I think that they certainly...
I think it's a really difficult position for Levy for that reason.
Yeah, because it's oddly, the trophy win has made it more difficult
Harder for him. Yeah.
But I think, though, that if he keeps him on, and they do okay, because, in Ange's first season in charge of Spurs, they nearly got Champions League through the Premier League. There could be an argument to say, okay, this season was a bit mad. I don't think they'll finish fifth next season with Postecoglou in charge. But you could make an argument to say, well, actually, they might finish a lot further up the table and so on and so forth.
Off the back of that, Andy, I know you've heard that Jim say this, but Jim made a really good point last week where he said, Postecoglou was shown in the Europa League they can play in a much more pragmatic way, and it can work for them. And maybe, for all we know, he's going to Levy and saying that's what we're going to do now. Yeah. And if he does do that, then that makes it slightly different.
Those performances will not get them anywhere in the Champions League.
However,
I think.
Yeah, but the flip side of that is they're now a Champions League club again. If you give it to Ange and it doesn't improve, they're going to be out on their arse straight away. You've got an opportunity to build on it, because will they qualify for the Champions League in the top 5 next season in the league? I don't think many people would bet on that. There's no Europa League way in. You could say they squirmed their way in. They got not lucky, but
it was fortunate.
Fortunate, okay. And you think, right, Ange, thanks very much. Give it to someone else who's more likely to sustain it.
Someone's shown him a lovely door and they've walked through it.
Exactly, yeah. Yes. So some are saying he keeps him on, and then when the US World Cup, US-Canada, and the North American World Cup is over, they get Pochettino in for that kind of, right, let's do this and see how it goes.
That's far from a silver bullet to sort out all their problems.
But I think that's sort of a little bit pie in the sky now, because a season in the Premier League is a long time with the managerial merry-go-round. So would I be giving him the boot or giving him one more season? I honestly don't know. But I know that's such a piss poor answer, because you want one way or the other.
No,
this is the thing.
It's your opinion.
But Andy, I simply do not know. Because
for me, it's obvious, because the fact is you have to ask about, obviously, better work, better performance gets you closer to where you want to be. They have been so far off it. Even if you talk about a big improvement, that probably doesn't take them through to the second stage of the Champions League, and it doesn't take them into the European places, which is not good enough for a club of that size.
Yep.
With the players they have.
They need to sustain that Champions League.
Yeah, and the fact is, look, it's all become so binary. The fact is, it's either he's won a trophy, he deserves to stay, or he's terrible. The truth is neither of those things, actually, because the fact is, I think part of the problem is because Postecoglou seemed to take it so personally that he's made it into quite a binary debate. You know, we saw it. You know, he's like, I'm not a clown, and obviously I have every sympathy with that. That was not polite or reasonable or desirable. But the way he's saying it, that either I'm a genius or an idiot. No one who knows what they're talking about is actually saying that. He can be, and he was, the good man, the right manager for them for a period of time. But that period of time has now passed. The club, not him, have been given this opportunity to accelerate a recovery. They need to take it.
I think that's probably fair. I think you talk about it seems a little bit pointless to talk about. The reason it puts me over to Andy's side of the fence is because you talk about improvement, you talk about what can they do next season. I mean, let's not lose sight of the fact that if they do want to be challenging where their wage bill would see them, given that, you know, to be commensurate with their wage bill, they need to be 6th or 7th in the league or whatever it is. You know, it's 30-point swing. I mean, it's not like, oh, we just need to do a bit here and do a bit there. They got 38 points. You know, to get up to that kind of Champions League position, you need to be up in the mid-60s, really, and above. So it seems a bit fanciful.
Got to give it to someone who might know what they're doing, maybe.
You can use the Europa League as a fig leaf, and of course it is a tremendously important fig leaf for Spurs fans, and I understand that, and it's not me saying they shouldn't enjoy it, but nonetheless, it is still a fig leaf, and that's not enough.
Okay. We move on. This is a question from Francis on X.
Some good stuff on X.
Yeah, absolutely. With 9 teams in Europe next year from the Premier League, who is best placed to take advantage of a lighter schedule next season and push up the table? And we remind you that teams with no European football next season: Brighton, Bournemouth, Brentford, Fulham, Everton, West Ham, Man United and Wolves, plus the promoted teams, of course.
Yeah, I think the promoted teams will take as read. They'll have enough on their plate, for sure. It's a really interesting question, this. I mean, I don't think you can realistically suggest that Manchester United have got it in them to be what we expect from them, which I guess is probably a little bit of a harsh way of phrasing it, but nonetheless, that's where we are. And I don't think, I just don't think it's reasonable given the state they're in. Although you could be surprised. I like the look of Everton. Actually,
do you really?
I like the look of Fulham.
Okay,
and clearly, and it's been the case for a little while now. A Bournemouth or a Brentford or a Brighton. Well, to be fair to Brighton, they've been in Europe. Bournemouth have flirted with it a lot this season and probably should have done better, I think. I mean, I think they probably run out of steam. And then the obvious ones, I think, are Brentford, Fulham and Everton. You could argue West Ham. So my thing on West Ham, I'm not going to go through all of them here, but I'll hand over to you in a minute. My point of view, my take on West Ham is the same as it's been since Potter's come in, which is just, nothing to add really. Let's see the pre-season. Let's see him working with the players. Let's see what he can do. I think it's completely ridiculous to judge him on anything that's happened since he's come in because of the type of manager he is. You assume that West Ham know what they're doing by hiring him, which is a big assumption given the West Ham ownership, but presumably they've hired him for a reason. They've got a possibility to do something for sure because I think Potter's a good manager. I think Everton have got a chance to reset, and Moyes in the past has at Everton done pretty good things, and since he's left Everton, it's been a mixed bag, but he's won trophies. Yeah, he won Conference League of West Ham, as we've said, and then new stadium, a new chance to kick on to fulfil what is really an incredible amount of untapped potential at that club.
I think the most relevant thing with Everton is they've been massively improved since he's come in.
Totally. 100%, really hard to beat. They've got this opportunity to go to a new stadium. And I think Fulham, I see Fulham quite a lot, not as much as you, Marcus. I look at Fulham and I think on their best day, exceptionally well-balanced team, well-coached, in a one-off game, they can genuinely beat anyone, right? But they have they have this flaw where they seem to look past games they should win. If they can sort that out, they can really get up into. I mean, they end up finishing 11th. I mean, about 8 or 9 points off it. I think that's an underachievement for where they came from because they had a real opportunity there, I think.
Yeah, I think
there's interest for all these teams to an extent.
There is. I think with Fulham, I mean, the crucial thing is keeping Marco Silva, and he said he's going to be there next season. So.
He's confirmed he's going to stay, isn't he?
But that tells you something about the direction of travel. That tells you that he believes there's something further to do.
Which is important, because I thought if he, the moment he feels he's hit a ceiling, then he might sort of start looking around. But I think with Bournemouth and Brentford, I think they could. I think you're looking at the 4 teams. Fair enough, you put Everton in there. I quite like that. But I was looking at Brighton, Bournemouth, Brentford and Fulham. And with Bournemouth and Brentford, it's all about keeping certain players, of course.
Yes.
Which is obvious. So
all of this is quite transfer window dependent, isn't it?
It is a bit. Whereas whereas actually, though, I think with Brighton and Fulham, I don't think they have... Certainly with Fulham, I don't think they have many players where people... Anthony Robinson would be the only one where the people think, they're going to have to really keep him there.
And
do you know what I mean?
Neither of them have too much to change.
Yeah.
If they didn't go out there and have a big transfer window, I'd still feel that both Brighton and Fulham had pretty good teams.
Yeah.
I guess the problem is at the moment, and going back to the actual wording of Francis' question, take advantage of a lighter schedule next year and push up the table. Now, immediately... we've sort of assumed that who could push into the European spots. Mm-hmm. Well, actually,
cup run.
Maybe that's not the most realistic aim.
Well,
because
Crystal Palace.
I think that's a good example. And I think when you look at the top of the Premier League, there is such a bun fight for those. Even with Man United and Tottenham being terrible and totally out of the picture in terms of European places from a Premier League perspective, there's a massive logjam at the top. So I think even though, say, Brighton, Fulham, to a lesser extent, Bournemouth and Brentford are so well run and they're going in the right direction, is it really reasonable to say you should be getting a European place next season? I think it's okay to say you could be getting a European place next season, maybe through the Conference League, but to be saying you should is too much. Now, I think West Ham are one to look at, because you talked about Potter before, Luke. They're coming from such a low point.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, United and Tottenham have stolen their shitty thunder, but they're in a bad place, West Ham, and they've been in a bad place for a considerable time, mainly due to board inaction, poor decisions. If they can get that sorted, if they can have, it's going to take a big transfer window of players going out as well as coming in, and obviously we've seen some of the older players who will be leaving, like Cresswell, Soufal, Fabianski, etc. There needs to be a profound makeover there, and Potter is going to need every one of those clear weeks to work with the players, to coach the players, to make them a team who can push towards the top 10.
I get that, and I think, as you've already said, a lot of this discussion is transfer window dependent, as it always is. Having this discussion in May is quite tough in a way, but when I look at West Ham, I think you put Potter's record at Chelsea to one side. I think that's fair enough to do that. I think he's always done pretty well outside of that, and I think it's a nice fit for him. And the reason I think that is because if he can be given the room, I do think you've got some players at West Ham you can build a coherent team around. You've got Jared Bowen, Mohamed Kudus is shown. I mean, he's perhaps not been quite as good this season, but he has shown he's capable. I think Aaron Wan-Bissaka's been good. Yeah, Aaron Wan-Bissaka,
he's been their best player this season.
And he's someone who's always available. Seems to play every game. Has added a little bit of bite to his game going forward. 5 assists in the Premier League this season. That was a thing that used to really dog him back in the day. He's a very defensive fullback, etc. He's done pretty well. I think there's players in there that have reached a really high level. I also think, perhaps as controversial as this sounds, I feel like Nicholas Füllkrug's really well suited to the Premier League if they can get a tune out of him and he can be managed properly. You look at someone like Lucas Paquetá. I know he's had his problems. He's linked with Man City. I mean, he didn't go to Man City for a weird reason. Yeah, he clearly got a very high ceiling. Even though he's moving into his late 20s now. So I think there's an opportunity there. And as Andy says, the fact that they're coming from such a low base as well, what does improvement look like for them? Perhaps not even that much. I mean, improvement for them looks like, adding to the 43 points you got this season, which is very doable. Yeah.
So we're basically saying anyone on there bar Man United.
Yeah. We haven't even mentioned Wolves. Wolves had a little bit, they wrapped their hand in at the very end of the season, but when Pereira came in and did really well, if he can really tap into that zeitgeist, like he has done so far, again, can they improve on 42 points? Absolutely. Cunha will be a loss to them, but I think Pereira has shown that he looks like a pretty good coach. So it's very, very, very easy to pick any one of those teams. I'd be looking for Brighton, Bournemouth or Brentford, though, to actually do it. to follow it up, because they haven't really done that this season. What about this from Steve on Blue Sky? Brackets, I'm in Marbella. Good for you, Steve. Oh, lovely. He says, you mentioned Jimmy Glass in last week's mailbag when you're talking about cult heroes and club legends. I was there that day, of course, at Carlisle, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. Tears were everywhere at the time. That for sure was my own Solskjaer moment. I'm just curious, what was your own unbelievable standout quote, this doesn't happen to my club moment?
To quote Graham Hunter, Fulham 4, Juventus 1. What the actual fuck? It's simply that. I mean, just that was sensational. You can say that, it wasn't a vintage Juventus side, but they still had some players in there, and Fabio Cannavaro getting sent off fairly early on, but they were 3-1 up from the first leg. Were old Juventus, the old lady. They met the young man that day, and it was. Everybody knows it. I think it was one of those standout results that everybody across the country, dare I say Europe, Andy, would have just been completely, intoxicated.
Give it one thing you haven't added as well is that yes, they were 3-1 up from the first leg, but Juventus also opened the scoring that night.
Yes,
Trezeguet scored very early on.
Trezeguet. So there's still some big names in there. So it's one of those very, very famous nights. And we talk about Premier League domination in certainly the not the Champions League, but in the Conference League and the Europa League. This was way before any of that kind of chat. This was back in 2010, and Fulham as well. And a side who, we've only seen them a couple of times playing in European competition. It's a very rare thing for them to be in there. They did pretty well. They equipped themselves well in those early in the group stage, got themselves through because there were some teams like Basel, for example. You think you could
saw them against Basel at home.
Yeah, I was there with you, brother. Yeah. But when you come up against Juventus, you kind of go, well, that's the end of the road. It's a glamour tie for any competition. Lose the first leg 3-1, and you think, well, that's actually not a terrible result. As Luke says, Trezeguet scores early on. The turnaround, it was phenomenal. And the fact is, when they went 2-1 in at the break, you're thinking there's a chance here. And because Cannavaro gets sent off because Zamora was giving him a terrible time, which is an incredible sentence to say.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, when they do it, and then 3-1, and you're thinking, you've got to see this off before extra time because you're still worried that despite them being down to 10 men, there's a canniness there. There's if it's penalties and all the rest of it. And Dempsey scores that amazing lobbed dink from the edge of the box.
The minute you
extraordinary night.
The minute you mention Fulham Juventus, I straight away think of that Dempsey goal. It's iconic.
Yeah, I mean, the Philippe Auclair, the journalist who we all know, said it was the greatest game he'd ever seen.
Right.
It was just... The atmosphere is not normally raucous at Craven Cottage, but when you just feel like there's a slice of history to be bitten into tonight, there was just that vibe, so that would be it. Thank you for indulging me.
Yeah, no, it's not. I remember that. I remember it well. It was an amazing season for Fulham. That it's incredible because they came up against some really big teams basically all the way through that.
Shakhtar were the best side they played.
Yeah.
Other than you could say Atletico Madrid. But again, with Atletico Madrid, that was when teams from the Champions League went down to the Europa.
Yeah, I think people would expect me to say Portsmouth winning the FA Cup, but I'm not going to say that.
I think I know what you're going to say.
I'm going to say Portsmouth getting promoted into the Premier League.
Okay.
What did you think I was going to say?
I thought you were going to say the moment where they went 2-0 up against AC Milan.
No, I'm not going to say that.
Okay.
Because the reason that Portsmouth, I'm saying Portsmouth getting promoted to the Premier League is because it was kind of from nowhere, really. And I mean, I know you can look retrospectively and say they had the money from Mandarich, the ITV digital collapse hurt a lot of other teams, but Portsmouth hadn't in the preceding 10 years or so. Maybe if you go back 10 years, they came third and didn't go up in the playoffs. But since that season. And Portsmouth were promoted in 2002, 2003, right? So since that 92-93 season where they came third, I'll give you a list of their finishes. 17th, 18th, 21st, 7th, 20th, 19th, 18th, 20th, 17th.
I mean, it's not even, there's no playoff place there.
And even the season before with the Prosnecki season, they still come 17th. I mean, they were nowhere near it. And the manner in which they went, it's not a case of, they were a bit shit and then they somehow managed to get promoted. They went from being like really bad, and some of those finishes in there, I think particularly the 96 season, maybe the 2001 season, it was bad. They were going to go down. Yet they go and they absolutely blitz the Championship. You know, they won it by 6 points in the end, but they were always going to get promoted automatically. They were 18 points clear of third. It kind of basically read that and got them clicking, and they just were seismically good. And there was nothing in my Portsmouth supporting life until that point where I was old enough to realise that we were anything other than just a bit shit.
But it's amazing when you're winning every week as well. I think that people don't understand that if you can win the Championship or get promoted, it's an amazing thing to see your team just bossing it. Because you're not going to do that in the Premier League.
It's quite surreal.
It is. It really is.
I remember them tanking Wimbledon as well.
But do you know what though, Luke? I think for myself and a lot of other
well done, he's 30.
for myself and a lot of other footballing supporters, I barely thought about Portsmouth. They were one of those sides you think, oh, are they up? Blimey, I'd never. You knew they existed, but they weren't a club like, say, like Wolves, for example, who you knew were a good side. And
hugely disappointed to hear that, Marcus.
Yeah, no, but are they going to come back up, or even someone like Millwall, for example? You knew these big sides were down there, and a little cup run here and there. So yeah, no.
When I knew something special was happening, it was in the third game of the season. I went to Selhurst Park to see them play Palace away. And they were 2-0 down, and they came back and they won 3-2. And at that point, I thought they're a pretty good team here because they won the first game of the season. They beat Forest, and that was going to be one of the tougher games. They drew away at Sheffield United, and they turned that around against Palace, and they went on a run after that. And there was one game away from home where they lost to Norwich, but other than that, they just kept winning. And I thought, okay, there's a chance here. And even the game they lost to Leicester in November, I'll get very boring here, but I'll keep it. There's one anomaly in that run. They lost at home to Leicester, and I was at that game. They lost 2-0, and it was an absolute farce of a game. Like, the pitch was totally waterlogged. It never should have carried on. It never should have been played, actually. And Portsmouth were knocking the ball about, and Leicester were quite agricultural, and they just mastered the conditions, and Pompey couldn't get near them. Because Pompey just couldn't play this game. You think of the players Pompey had, like Matt Taylor, Steve Stone, Paul Merson, Pericard from Juventus. They had all these players who liked to knock the ball around. They couldn't do it, and so they got beaten quite easily. Other than that, they were untouchable.
Yeah. Andy, surely you're going to go for the obvious one here.
It's too difficult because
when they moved to Milton Keynes.
It's too difficult because this doesn't happen to my club moment. Everything has happened to my club. And everything.
Great point.
The thing is, most of it, if you wrote it down and told it as like, a football fiction story, it would be ludicrous.
The AFC Wimbledon story.
You would never believe it. So, like, when I describe to my children when I was younger that, I've seen my team playing every one of the top 9 divisions in English football. Yeah. And when I was your age, I saw us win at like Liverpool and Man United and Spurs and Arsenal. It sounds mad.
Sounds bonkers, yeah.
And so I guess the other side of it, that this doesn't happen to my club moment, I'm going to rewind 6 days or 5 days to the playoff final on Monday at Wembley, the League Two playoff final, because Wimbledon just had it in hand the whole way. So from the final day of the season, where we won 1-0 at Grimsby to make sure we were in the playoffs, it was 4 successive 1-0 wins, final day of the season, 2 legs of the playoff semi-final and the final, and we just had it all in hand. And the feeling, actually, especially like since AFC Wimbledon have not just got into professional football but league football, it becomes a completely different game, because you were talking about your team winning every week, which obviously when AFC Wimbledon started we mostly did because of course we had greater resources than everyone else. Now we're back to being the underdogs that we were when I was a kid, albeit in a Premier League or First Division context back then. But this season felt well different, because when we got promoted, which will always be one of my favourite football supporting days, when we got promoted back to the league in 2011 against Luton, which again sounds weird. Yeah. When we got promoted back to the league in the final at the Etihad, or when we won in 2016 to go up to League One for the first time as AFC Wimbledon, those were great days, but pleasant surprises. Whereas the start of this season, you know what you were saying about realising like third game of the season that you had a proper team. I realised about 4 games into this season, we've got a really good team this year. and we need to take
That comes with its own pressure, right?
Yeah, we need to take this opportunity and go up. And it's always Wimbledon fighting against the odds. And even though Wimbledon have overachieved as compared to budget this season, there was definitely a tension, especially as we chucked automatic promotion really in the closing weeks of the season, of we have to do it with this team. And obviously with this team, it's so much more transient when you're at League Two because most of the players are on like 1 or 2 year contracts.
Or loan.
So
loans, a lot of loans down there.
So the feeling of getting over the line, dealing with it like totally calmly and getting over the line, it was joy, but it was like quite a lot of relief as well. Yeah. And that's an unusual feeling.
It is, and it is. Good question there from Steve on Blue Sky.
Well done, Steve.
Hope you have a nice time in Marbella. Thanks for that. And thank you for listening to the Football Ramble Mailbag, part of the Acast Creator Network. Luke and I are back with Pete and Vish on Monday to react to the Champions League final.
What a treat.
Please do send us your responses, opinions and questions for next week's mailbag and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your pods. Have a good one. See you Monday.